Hello, I'm Brian Callanan. State leaders say Washington has one of the most severe housing shortages in the U.S., with a need for 1 million units over the next 20 years.
It's not a problem that I can ignore.
That's why Senator Yasmin Trudeau and other state lawmakers are working on policies to build more housing, especially around transit. Trudeau also wants to cap rent increases at 5% over a 12-month period and require landlords to give 6 months' notice for any rent hike over 3%.
For renters that don't know what's coming the next time they get a notice, that's like living in constant fear.
But her rent stabilization plan faces opposition, even in her own party. Plus, some lobbyists say the state is asking for too much too quickly.
They're going to need to delay that effort.
The Association of Washington Cities points out local governments across the state are about to wrap up their decade-long comprehensive plan update process with zoning and density considerations from last year's session, and the legislature's new ideas don't all fit in.
There's just no way to incorporate significant changes at this point without going back to the drawing board.
We're at the table to negotiate these things. We'll do it in a bicameral, bipartisan way.
Representative Mia Gregerson says the state's working with its city partners. She's pushing to allow homeowners to split up their lots and build accessory dwelling units. And she has a plan for single-room occupancy units.
Co-living is such a great opportunity for people like you and I who may just want to live in a small home.
But there's concern the proposal would reduce or eliminate parking mandates while not addressing a bigger housing crisis.
We really need durable, ongoing revenue to invest in particularly lower income housing that the private market is just never going to be able to deliver.
Is it time for Olympia to pause on its push for more housing options? Or time to act with urgency?
Do we think that future investors will want to invest in our state if there continues to be more tents?
There's just a huge commitment to housing every individual, every family in our state. And we have fallen short.
This week, we open the door on a new set of state housing proposals on City Inside Out. Hello and welcome to City Inside Out. I'm Brian Callanan, and today we're talking about our crisis with housing affordability in the state of Washington. And I have three experts with me. They're going to break this down, including Michael Hubner, who is a long-range planning manager at the Office of Planning and Community Development for the City of Seattle. Michael, great to have you here.
Thank you.
And also we have with us Alex Brennan, Executive Director of Futurewise, a nonprofit that works on livable communities and protecting our natural resources. Alex, good to have you too.
Good to be here.
And finally, we have with us Sean Flynn, Board President and Executive Director of the Rental Housing Association of Washington, which represents more than 5,000 small to mid-sized landlords. Sean, good to see you too.
Thanks for having me today.
All right, let's jump in here. Just to give some background on this, state lawmakers this session trying to add on to the work they did last year when it comes to housing. They say we can't wait. Our state needs 1 million units over the next 20 years, with at least half in the affordable category. So with that in mind, a number of housing bills are on the table. And Michael, I just want to look big picture with you first. Seattle and other cities are wrapping up a 10-year comprehensive plan update this year. They're looking at zoning and density. Will you be able to incorporate all the work that the state is talking about down in Olympia?
Well, certainly any legislation that's passed this year is going to be a challenge for us to include in this comprehensive plan. But thankfully, the way we do planning in Washington State is there's an opportunity to amend the comprehensive plan in years in between the major updates. And we understand that the legislators who are looking at some of the most impactful bills, and I know we're going to get into some of the specifics, are thinking about this, and we're working with them through our representation in Olympia to set deadlines that are workable, that we can get done. If not this year, within the next several years.
Right. It can be played out over the next several years. And thank you. We'll break down some of those issues coming up. Alex, I'll jump over to you and just talk about some of the things that people in our community are talking about. Rents nearly doubled in our state over roughly the past decade, according to UW figures. You got homelessness much more visible. You've got a number of people concerned about climate change. That's on people's minds too. I know that you deal with a lot of people that are connected to housing here. Are those the main issues that you're talking about? Or just give us a snapshot, if you could, of what the Futurewise perspective is on our state's housing crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a top priority for everybody that we work with, right? rents have gone up so much, housing prices have gone up so much. It's really affecting everybody in communities all across the state. This is not, just a Seattle problem, for example.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, we really work on the types of planning and land use regulations that affect where new housing can be built and how we build it. And so we want to leverage those systems and those policies as much as we can to address the crisis. We also want to partner with folks that focus on other strategies, right, that are looking at subsidies for affordable housing and that are looking at tenant protections to help tenants stay in their homes. So we really think that we need that three-pronged strategy to address the crisis.
Great. Sean, let me go to you next. I want to talk about how landlords are responding to our housing crisis. Figures from the city of Seattle show between 2018 and 2022, Seattle built 11,000 new apartment units, a lot of those big buildings we see. However, during that same period, small landlords pulled more than 11,000 units off the market. Give us a landlord's viewpoint on the housing crisis, big picture here. I know that landlords have been through a lot with the pandemic. I just wanted to get your perspective on this.
Well, as a housing provider and someone who represents a lot of housing providers throughout the state, we are supportive of more housing of all different shapes and sizes, because one of the things that makes Washington great is all the different types of folk that we have live here, which brings me to those 11,000 units.
Yeah.
Okay, those 11,000 units were built under very specific codes that allowed to be built for essentially one sort of folks living in that unit. Not everyone can live or chooses to live in an open one-bedroom apartment with a cat.
Got it. Okay.
No offense to people with cats.
Yeah, dog people are okay too.
Totally considered too. But we have lots of folks in Washington State who live multi-generationally, which is good, right? And we should be providing housing for them and the person who wants this open one-bedroom with a cat. And everyone in between. If you're a recently divorced person with needs an apartment with 3 bedrooms, that should be available to you as well. I always say that we want the housing market to look like the cereal aisle. You walk down the cereal aisle in an American grocery store, no matter where you are in the world and where you're in the country, there's every different type of cereal you can choose from. There's Cocoa Puffs, there's muesli, that European
we don't want
garlic, right? And everything in between. Grape nuts, I like grape nuts, right?
Sure.
The housing market should be the same way. There should be a housing option for everyone, no matter what your housing needs are, but also what your income levels are.
Yeah.
Right? We live in a state that has a massive budget surplus. Right? We have a very wealthy state. There's no reason anyone should be lacking for housing in our state.
Okay.
That being said, you're right. Small housing providers are leaving the market, and they're voting with their feet, and they're not voting with the feet by the tens. They're voting their feet by the thousands.
Okay.
And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because in order to fix this problem, we don't need less housing providers. We need more of them. And we need more of them by the thousands and tens of thousands to meet that million household goal
in the next 20 years. Got it. Thank you. Let me move on to some of the proposals that the state's considering here. And maybe I can start with you, Alex. Senator Trudeau's rent stabilization bill. This is House Bill 2114, would cap annual rent increases for existing tenants to 5%. However, a landlord would not face any limits on raising the rent for the next tenant who comes in. Senator Trudeau wanted to make sure that I mentioned that piece of it after I talked to her earlier. I know this idea has had some support, but there's been a good amount of pushback, too, on this as well. What do you think about this rent stabilization idea?
So we are supporting Trudeau's rent stabilization bill. We think that this is a really important part of a comprehensive strategy. And again, we need to be doing multiple things at once, right? But a lot of renters have seen their rents increase really dramatically. This is something that affects people's entire lives, right? You not being able to afford, not knowing what kind of rent increase you might be getting in the future creates a lot of instability in people's lives. And we're working on a lot of strategies to reduce costs through market mechanisms, but we know that it's going to take several years for some of those strategies to take effect. If in the meantime, people lose their homes because they can't afford to stay there, those strategies that are going to help reduce costs 5 years from now just aren't going to be enough for them. So we think this is a really important part of the strategy. We also think, though, at the same time, we need to keep finding ways to reduce costs both for developers and for property owners so that we're not kind of over-relying on those rent stabilization strategies.
Thank you. And I wanted to make sure I went to you next on this, Sean, because I know a lot of landlords have said no to this concept of rent stabilization. Talk to me about that, please.
First of all, a couple of things. It's rent control.
Okay.
It's not rent stabilization. Like, you can call it anything. You can rebrand this thing every different way you want. It's still a failed policy. It's never worked. It's never done the thing they tell you it's going to do anywhere it's been implemented.
Even if you can rent to the next tenant at a higher amount, you don't.
Even if.
Okay.
Because let me.
Please.
You want to talk about those units that were lost? Mm-hmm. You institute rent control in the state of Washington. The least of your concerns will be my people leaving. It will be the development money that will not show up to build those units.
Yeah.
And my people will leave too, by the droves, because it doesn't work, and it's never worked, and it won't work now. Also, the House bill is someone else's bill. The Senate bill is Senator Trudeau's bill.
Yeah.
But no, I think rent control is the worst option you can do to our housing market in the state of Washington.
Okay.
There's this city in San Francisco called San Francisco.
Yes.
You can
Look it up.
You could check it out, right? California has lost more housing to wildfire than it's built in the last 5 years. Like, this is, we are an innovative state, okay? We're the home of tech giants and biotech and all sorts of really bright people. We've got bright people sitting with me here today.
Sure.
I think the idea of dusting off a failed policy that dates back to the 40s and didn't work then, and saying we're going to get it right this time is counterproductive.
Is there any rejoinder?
Can I respond to
briefly,
that?
Please.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we think that there are examples of rent control programs that work and rent stabilization programs that work. I think San Francisco is an example of trying to implement rent stabilization and not doing anything else, and not addressing the long-term supply constraints that San Francisco has. And I do think that when you do that, that can cause a lot of problems. But I think that our state has demonstrated that we want to take multiple approaches to do this, and and frankly, the proposal in the current bill, it's allowing increases that are over what a typical inflation rate is. That's actually pretty generous, and I think that again, there are programs, I think, especially when you look internationally, programs that have been shown where you can increase housing supply, increase housing options, while providing the stability for tenants that they need.
A brief rejoinder, and then I wanted to make sure I asked Michael something.
It's a 5% cap.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
It's a 5% cap. It's a hard cap.
Okay.
So it's not inflation plus. It's a 5% cap.
Right.
And the issue here isn't whether the size of the cap, right? The issue is that it's a failed policy.
Okay.
But I don't think anyone at this table would agree to cap their income for the rest of their lives at 5% per year.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
And I'm happy to hear otherwise.
Fair enough. I do want to make sure I move on to some other pieces, and thank you. That's Bill 5961 from Senator Trudeau. I appreciate that.
Not a problem.
Michael, I know the rent stabilization thing is a bit out of your lane, but I know you deal with affordable housing a lot. Can you talk to me about just some of the challenges that the city of Seattle has to provide the affordable housing that's needed here? Can you talk about it broadly, please?
Yeah, and I'll try to connect it to the conversation we just had, because I think what we're talking about here is a tool that we're having this debate about in the context of, as Alex referred to, a long-term supply supply constraint in the state, which is creating market pressures that are driving up housing costs and causing housing instability, which this rent stabilization idea is attempting to get at. Here at Seattle, what we have been doing well before the legislature started labeling its legislative sessions. The year of housing, I think it was last year. And
Housing 2.0.
This is Housing 2.0.
Right.
3-4 years ago, when we were thinking about what a new plan for the future of the city was going to look like, what was going to be most important, housing really rose to the top. Issues like stability, displacement of existing communities, and affordability rose to the top of what we heard from the community members and rose to the top of what we identified looking at the data and the trends.
Okay.
So we have, and I can speak, I mean, just at a high level, we have been the crane capital of the U.S. in recent years. We've also been the epicenter of an economic boom in the tech industry, in biotech, in others. And quite frankly, we've produced a lot of housing. and that has been helpful. But we've also grown in terms of jobs, in terms of population, at a rate even faster.
Right. Those high dollar tech jobs that are coming in, are they pushing out more units for them and fewer units for people that need affordable units?
At the same time, we have a growth strategy,
Yes.
a concept of how we're planning for growth in the city around urban villages and transit, which has a lot of benefits. But we've realized that we need to refresh that concept.
Okay.
And that's what this next comprehensive plan is all about, which is what can we do to grow the housing supply, the diversity of housing types.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to live in with their cat in the studio.
We're going to get so many emails from the cat people.
And I'd love to talk about a couple of bills that are getting at some of the things that we were already thinking about as a city.
Yeah.
How can our historically single-family neighborhoods accommodate a greater variety of not only buildings, but actual spaces that people can live in and that can afford.
Okay.
Right now, we're looking at a single-family home where just any single-family home is over $1 million.
Yeah.
A new construction single-family home is well north of that. So new construction of that housing type is really, even with our ADU ordinance, which has created some affordability, and people are very interested in building and owning or renting those. The new House Bill 1110, the middle housing bill.
Yes,
missing middle housing. That's a concept we were already exploring in our city's comprehensive plan. Now we have the state stepping in and saying, here are the standards that we would expect of a city like Seattle.
Okay.
And we're planning around that to create opportunities for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, small stacked flats, or courtyard apartments, a lot of different housing types that we hope can address that challenge around affordability of ownership housing. And I know there's a whole other, I'd love to talk about TOD and the supply of rentals as well.
Can you hold that for a second? Because I want to get into the supply issue.
Please.
Thanks for leading me that way. Maybe we can do if we're talking about cereal, let's do the Quick Oats version here, Sean. I want to talk about this idea of increasing development by splitting lots. House Bill 1245. It's received some good momentum early on. 30-second version. What do you think about this?
I support the bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you like about it?
Well, what I like about it, and to relate back to the City of Seattle's comment, the City of Seattle's been a leader on what we call infill or missing middle housing for a long time. Way back when the first DADU ordinances were
attached accessory dwelling
units, right? Were passed, and it was a very narrow program, and the city council worked hard to get it. And then Spokane jumped out ahead, and they passed a missing middle bill earlier this year that was crackerjack. It was great. We need more of that, right? If you look at the map of the City of Seattle, roughly, and someone will correct me on this if I'm wrong, 2/3 of the housing options are zoned single family.
Right.
You're not going to be able to fix the housing crisis without getting into that problem, right? Of that we just don't have enough land dedicated to multifamily stuff. We were supportive of the expansions of the ADU and the DADU, and so now you can get 3 if you have the right size lot. You can get 3 separate living units on a lot, which is great. Our concern is you have to have someone who's willing to spend the money to build the unit, and then also be a housing provider to that unit once it's up and running. So while on one hand, Seattle's done a great job, on another hand, we've had 10 years of more and more what people call tenant protections, what I like to call rental restrictions, right? Because it gets you less rentals. There's no one's going to want to run them in a regulatory environment that they can't control their unit.
Fair enough.
So if you need to build it, but then you need someone to operate it. And what has been happening in the City of Seattle in the last 10 years, as the numbers show, is small housing providers saying, we don't want to do business here.
Yeah, and Alex, I'm going to get to you in a second. Can you respond to that? I'm sure you've heard that from a few different landlords around the area.
In fact, I think that some of the members of your organization have been great to see them at some of our open houses and community meetings. We've been talking with small landlords. We absolutely recognize that if we're talking about a more mixed housing supply and smaller buildings, larger buildings, most of our new rentals are being built in pretty big projects right now, just in building size. And it's going to take a very healthy ecosystem of builders, owners, and a safety net in place for households. And there are many for whom, I think your question about affordability, for whom the market is not going to be able to fully serve affordably. And that's where things like the city's housing levy and other tools that we have and expanding where we can on those come into play.
Got it. Alex, a quick thought on lot splitting, maybe some pros and cons. What are you thinking about with this issue?
We support lot splitting in cities. I mean, I think, for a lot of the same reasons, right? We want to see more housing options. Land is getting more and more expensive, and so if we can have smaller lots, that creates opportunities for more affordable homes. And I think to some of the financing issues, I think land use can only do so much, right? We can change our zoning laws and our land use laws to things like lot splitting, but we also need new financing strategies to make it feasible for small landlords, small property owners.
It's got to pencil out. Yeah, right. Alex, let me stick with you, and I'm going to go back down the line with the co-living bill that Representative Gregerson's talking about, trying to get more of these single-room occupancy units built, House Bill 1998. On the plus side, I know there's more units and more density, but I know the way the bill looks in January, there's no parking required to be built for these co-living units if they're near a major transit stop. I know some cities have some issues with that. Can you talk to me about co-living and your take on it, please?
Yeah, so I think this falls along the same lines of more housing options for people who have different types of needs, right? Not everybody wants to live in a co-living project, but there are lots of people that do, and frankly, right now, there's not a lot of options for them.
Yeah.
And this is also it's a type of housing that can be lower cost in many cases. It can also be more social. This is an opportunity to have shared spaces where you meet your neighbors and interact with them more, especially for single people who want to build that kind of community. I think it's a great option. We've actually seen in the city of Seattle, there was a time period when a lot of that type of housing could be built.
In the 2010s, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, and then the city kind of put in place additional restrictions, and we really don't see very much of that housing built anymore. And so I think taking some steps to the state level to bring some of that housing option back is a really positive thing.
Yeah.
And we are generally don't think that we should be requiring a certain minimum amount of parking, particularly near transit. That doesn't mean no parking will get built, right?
Okay.
But it means that the particular developer or property owner can decide how much parking is appropriate for the project.
Because it costs money to build parking, right?
And parking is very expensive. I think people don't realize how much it can cost to build. A single parking space can cost over $50,000.
Yeah, it's
Above ground.
Yeah, that's just the
Go
above
below
ground
and it
part.
starts to get more and
You
more
better believe
expensive.
it.
It's very expensive.
Can you
Right,
speak to this SRO piece, or excuse me, co-living here? I know.
Oh, it goes by a number, by many names. Apodment is another.
Right.
That was actually a company that built a lot of them. Other congregate living. In any event, this conversation that's happening in Olympia about expanding opportunities, I think, is very much the direction we were already thinking about. What could we do to add back in this option among the mix of housing units in places like our transit station areas, in our urban villages and urban centers. Very much, I think, in line with the direction the city is going. We want a bill that's going to give us the flexibility to have those fit into the different contexts where they'd be built, but I think generally supportive of the concept and going back to some of the options that were available more than a decade ago. On the parking front, the city of Seattle is already generally very supportive of relaxed or no parking requirements where there is that high transit accessibility. So that really is very consistent with what we'd be doing.
Got it. Sean, some quick thoughts on co-living units? Is it something that your group supports?
Yeah, generally we support this. I think that one of the things about this bill too is that it's not just for CDUs. That this bill's sort of broadly written, so it would also allow folks. So let's say you're an older person who wanted to age in place longer, but wanted to rent a room out in your home, and that would allow you to stay in your home for more years, right? Which I think we can all agree is a good thing, and we should be supporting that. And that this bill would pave a way to allow that to happen.
Okay.
Right. And so I think that's one of the greatest things about that bill. So it allows not just the large developers to build CDUs, which we're also for, which is cool, right? But it also allows, I think maybe a more human aspect of it is it would allow an older person to stay in their home longer. My concern about it is that while this sounds great, we also are facing a regulatory environment where now grandma, who's trying to age in place, is a housing provider and is facing a myriad of housing restrictions and things that she can and cannot control about her living environment. And if something goes sideways, we have an eviction calendar that is stacked out a year.
Sure.
So again, we want to build policy that builds housing and provides housing units for all different shapes and sizes, but you got to have an operating environment that people want to operate housing in.
Thank you. And I only have a minute to give you, Michael, but I did want to touch on this transit-oriented development piece because I know it's important for the city.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that and what you're doing with this? Because Senate Bill 6024, there was a lot of progress in this last year, didn't pass. I know it's something the city of Seattle's looking at, though, too.
We're trying. This is probably the most potentially impactful bill this session. I'll say two things about it. I mean, number one is we have an environmental impact statement we're doing for our comprehensive plan.
Yes.
Many of the concepts that you see in this bill, adding more housing around light rail, around bus rapid transit, building our supply of apartment options in the city, or already we were studying them. This bill would expand on that somewhat, but is very much in line with the kinds of things we're looking at for the next comprehensive plan.
Great. Thank you. And I have to do the 15-second version, unfortunately, to wrap up. Some final thoughts, Sean, maybe to some state lawmakers who might be watching this show, looking for some input. What do you want to tell them, looking at this big raft of housing bills they're considering?
I mean, the Rent Housing Association of Washington supports supply. We need more housing units, and we need more housing units of all shapes and sizes, and we need them yesterday.
Okay.
But you've got to be careful about building a regulatory environment where only the rich people can run them.
Okay, got it. Alex, some final thoughts, please.
The thing I wanted most to share is just with the folks who are watching this, the state legislators are really eager for input from their constituents, and it's easier than ever to provide that input. There's opportunities to sign in with your position on a bill, to email your legislators and call them. So I just really encourage folks who are watching this show who care about these issues and care about housing affordability to reach out to their legislators and get engaged in the discussions this session.
Michael, just to wrap up, I know a lot of people are eager to see that comprehensive plan draft.
Right after they're done talking to their legislators, we encourage you to come and talk to us about, we will be releasing a draft comprehensive plan update in the coming month or so.
Okay, great.
The EIS will be out there. There'll be information on what we're doing around middle housing, and we're going to have lots of opportunities for people to come and talk with us and let them know what they think after they get to see it.
Great, thank you. And we will be right back. What are people saying on social media about the housing bills being considered in Olympia? One group says, Washington state faces an affordable housing crisis, and existing resources are insufficient to meet the growing need. Another person comments, let's get to work on things that actually impact Washingtonians, like crime, gas prices, and making it easier to get building permits to ease the housing crisis. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media. Great to have that input. Thank you for your input, and we'll see you everybody next time on City Inside Out.